20 people have been executed in the state of Indiana. Joseph Trueblood, June 13, 2003. Susan Boucher, his ex-girlfriend, had stated that she intended to make amends with her ex-husband, which infuriated Trueblood. One day, while Susan and her two young children were being picked up by Trueblood, he shot Susan 3 times in the head and each child once. He then borrowed a shovel, drove to his twin brother's house, confessed what he had done, and buried the 3 of them in a shallow grave in a remote location. Trueblood expressed a wish to enter a guilty plea and did so following the testimony of 4 witnesses during the trial. Trueblood told the probation officer that Susan had shot the children before taking her own life and then tried to recant his guilty plea, but it was denied. His last words, "My attorney has my last statement." He did not have a final meal. However, according to a report, Trueblood, with some family and friends and a priest, shared candy, potato chips, and a Coke from a vending machine. Donald Ray Wallace Jr., March 10, 2005. Thomas Snyder, an Indiana state trooper, was called to Ralph Hendricks's reported burglarized residence on January 14, 1980. Trooper Snyder visited the Gilligan's residence, which is next to the Hendricks one, as part of the investigation to ask if the occupants had heard or seen anything strange. The back entrance of the house had a shattered window. 4 dead bodies were found in the family room when Snyder went inside the residence. They were Teresa and Patrick Gilligan, along with their 2 kids, ages 5 and 4. The 2 children were bound together, and Mrs. Gilligan's hands were tied behind her. David Wilson, MD, the coroner, stated in his testimony that gunshot wounds caused brain damage in all 4 fatalities. Wallace was identified as the perpetrator and given the death penalty. His last words were, "I hope everyone can find peace with this." His last meal consisted of filet mignon, baked potato, soup, and chocolate truffle cake. William Benefiel Jr., April 21, 2005. He was on death row for the murder of 19-year-old Dolores Wells. She disappeared in January 1987 in Terre Haute, Indiana. A surviving victim, 17-year-old Alicia, who was abducted by Benefiel while carrying a gun and wearing a mask while traveling to a store in Terre Haute, provided evidence for the state's case. After being gagged and restrained, Alicia was driven to Benefiel's house and brought inside. Alicia was held captive in Benefiel's house for 4 months, during which time she was essayed and more than 60 times while being held at gunpoint. She spent the majority of this time tied and chained to a bed. He placed toilet paper in her mouth, taped her eyes shut, and cemented her eyelids shut. She was beaten and he cut her with a knife. 3 months later, Alicia noticed Dolores Wells, a second girl, living with them. She was handcuffed on the bed, naked, her lips and eyes taped shut. She witnessed Benefiel beating Dolores and pinching her nose shut after applying superglue. After spending 2 hours away from the house, Benefiel came back and told Alicia that he had killed and buried Dolores. Benefiel shoved Alicia into a crawl space in the ceiling when the police knocked on the door. She was saved by the police after they entered with a search warrant. Soon after, Dolores's body was discovered in a wooded area. An autopsy determined that hypoxia was the cause of death, and they also found damage to her private parts. In 1988, a jury convicted him of murder, essay, criminal imprisonment, and deviant conduct, and he was condemned to death. In the years that followed, his attorneys claimed he suffered from mental illness, but the court nonetheless ordered the execution to go forward despite his not guilty plea due to insanity. His last words were, "Let's get this over with, let's do it." His final meal consisted of pizza, a beef sandwich, 4 pints of Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and about 12 soft drinks. Gregory Scott Johnson, May 25, 2005. He was on death row for the murder of 82-year-old Ruby Hutzler. When Ruby Hutzler's house caught fire, a newspaper delivery boy alerted a neighbor to call the authorities. He came back, but the smoke and flames prevented him from entering the house. In roughly 30 minutes, firefighters were able to extinguish that fire. Ruby Hutzler was discovered 5 feet from the front entrance with 20 cracked ribs and broken bones on her cheek and nose. She also had fractures to her spine and larynx. According to an autopsy, she died from these wounds rather than from breathing in smoke or fire. Johnson was listed as a suspect in multiple local fires, according to a dispatch. He was detained for public intoxication when officers observed him watching the firefighters battling the fire. While in jail, Johnson acknowledged starting 4 recent fires in the neighborhood, but first denied any participation. Johnson was questioned subsequently about if he was attempting to join his friend Mark Weishart on death row by killing Hutzler. Johnson broke down and made a complete confession. He was a prosecution witness who testified against his friend Mark Weishart, who was accused of capital murder. Johnson claimed that after using a broom to smash a front window to gain entry, he confronted 90-pound Hutzler in her pajamas right away. Slumping to the ground, Hutzler gasped for air. Johnson claimed that when he was moving about the home, he stomped on her. He found some matches, took a watch and silver dollars, lit a fire, and ran away. His last words were, "Everyone has been professional." His last meal consisted of barbecued ribs, pulled pork sampler, sautéed mushrooms, and Oreo pie. Kevin Aaron Connor, July 27, 2005. He was on death row for murdering 4 people. Connor was having a drink with friends Bruce Voge, Tony Moore, and Steve Wentland at Moore's house. With Connor in the back and Moore in the front, Wentland went for a drive. After an argument, Moore used Connor's knife to strike Wentland. Moore pursued and ran over Wentland after he jumped out of the car. Then Connor killed him with a knife. Connor and Moore got into a heated argument about the previous night's events when they drove to Connor's employee's warehouse. Connor used a shotgun to kill Moore. Then Connor came back to Moore's house and shot Voge on the sofa. After that, Connor ran away to Texas. He was just 22 years old at the time of the murders. Connor also claimed to have killed a fellow death row inmate in 2002, Jerry Thompson, who was 41 years old. His last words were, "Everyone has to die sometimes. Let's get on with the killing." His last meals, 4 chili dogs, onion rings, banana split, and Oreo blizzard. Alan Lemon Matheney, September 28, 2005. On March 4, 1989, while on an 8-hour leave from prison, he was found guilty of using a shotgun to bludgeon his ex-wife Lisa Bianco to death. He was incarcerated at Pendleton Correctional Facility at the time of the battery and confinement of Bianco. Matheney traveled to St. Joseph County, even though the 8-hour release permission allowed him to go just to Indianapolis. He grabbed an unloaded shotgun from a friend's house and changed. In Mishawaka, he parked his car 2 homes away from Bianco's residence. He followed her down the street after breaking in through the rear door of her home. While his 2 daughters and many neighbors watched, he captured her and used the shotgun to beat her to death. Nevertheless, this lawsuit was delayed for 16 years due to appeals. As a result of the case, Indiana law was changed to make sure victims are notified in the event that an offender was freed. Additionally, the state consented to compensate Bianco's estate with $900,000. He claimed he was legally insane during his trial. He was diagnosed with schizophreniform disorder by one mental health expert and paranoid personality disorder with psychotic delusions by another. However, at the time of the crime, none of them claimed he was legally insane. According to Matheney, he thought Bianco was plotting against him. On September 19, he declined to show up for an Indiana parole board hearing. Then, on September 24, 2005, the Indiana Supreme Court denied a motion for a new trial by a vote of 5-0. On September 27, Governor Mitch Daniels finally refused to grant clemency. His last words were, "I love my family and my children. I'm sorry for the pain I caused them. I thank my friends who have stood by me, especially Pat and Rehanna and Beverly and Lois. I am sure my grandchildren will grow up healthy and happy in the care of their wonderful parents." His last meal consisted of fried chicken with extra order of spicy wings, corn on the cob, potato wedges, biscuits, chocolate milkshake. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.